Imagine coming home after a long day, only to find your house ransacked, your bank account emptied, and the love of your life gone, disappeared with another man. But it's not just betrayal. It's a perfectly executed con. And the worst part? The system won't help you. So what do? If you're Ethan Caldwell, you don't just walk away. You fight back. And when the hunter becomes the hunted, revenge is just a matter of time. The red ink of the grading pen smudged slightly as Ethan Caldwell signed off on the last exam paper of the evening. The dim fluorescent light in his classroom flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the desk cluttered with textbooks and neatly stacked assignments. It was a Friday night, long past the time he should have gone home, but work had become an escape. It was easier to focus on chemical formulas than to acknowledge the silence that waited for him at home. At precisely 9:47 p.m., the piercing ring of his phone shattered the quiet. His hand froze mid-movement, a slight tension gripping his chest as he glanced at the screen. An unfamiliar number. He hesitated for only a second before answering. A voice crackled through the speaker, urgent and hushed. "Ethan, get home now. There's someone in your house. With Claire." The words barely registered before he was on his feet. The papers he had so meticulously arranged scattered to the floor as he grabbed his keys, his breath quickening. A sharp metallic taste filled his mouth as adrenaline surged through him. His neighbor, Mrs. Lockwood, wasn't the type to overreact. If she was calling, it meant something was very wrong. He forced himself to move fast but think clearly. His first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a distant cousin, an old friend Claire forgot to mention. But deep inside he knew. The late nights, the sudden secrecy, the shift in her touch, it had been leading to this. The drive home blurred into a series of frantic moments. The red glow of traffic lights barely registered as he sped through intersections, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His thoughts raced ahead of him, painting scenarios he didn't want to imagine. Was she in danger? Or was this something far worse? By the time he turned onto his street, the quiet suburban neighborhood had never felt so suffocating. His house loomed ahead, a place that had once meant comfort. But now, with the front door slightly ajar, it looked different. Like a crime scene. A single red stiletto lay just past the threshold, a stark contrast against the hardwood floor. His stomach clenched as he recognized it. Claire had worn those shoes on their anniversary last month, laughing as he had twirled her around in a dimly lit restaurant. His hands trembled as he pushed the door open fully. The house had been ransacked. Open drawers gaped like wounds, clothes were strewn carelessly across the floor, and the faint scent of perfume mixed with the sharp tang of alcohol. The framed photos that once lined the walls were missing, leaving only empty hooks and faint outlines where they had once been. He moved forward, each step feeling heavier. In the kitchen, something metallic caught the light. Claire's wedding ring rested on the counter next to an empty bottle of champagne, the expensive one they had been saving for a special occasion. He swallowed hard, forcing his legs to keep moving. The bedroom door was ajar, the soft glow of a bedside lamp casting eerie shadows against the walls. His breath hitched as he stepped inside. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled in disarray. Drawers hung open, their contents spilling onto the floor. But what drew his attention was the single sheet of paper lying on the mattress. His name was scrawled at the top in Claire's familiar handwriting, but the words beneath it sliced through him like a blade. "I'm leaving with him. Don't try to find us. If you do, you'll regret it." The room swayed slightly. He inhaled, trying to steady himself, but the weight of the betrayal pressed down on his chest like a physical force. His fingers trembled as he reached for his phone, his mind still trying to process the words staring back at him. He opened their joint bank account, already knowing what he would find. The balance was zero. They had been saving for years. $240,000, money for their future, for a home they had dreamed of buying together. And now it was gone. His gaze drifted toward the closet, where the safe door hung open, empty. Jewelry passed down through generations, personal keepsakes, anything of value, all taken. A hollow laugh escaped his lips. It wasn't just betrayal. This was a clean, calculated extraction. His pulse steadied, no longer racing with panic, but something else, resolve. Claire hadn't just left. She had erased herself from their life, carefully and deliberately, with the precision of someone who had planned it for months. The ache in his chest transformed into something colder, something sharper. He wasn't going to beg. He wasn't going to plead for explanations. He was going to take back what was his. Outside, the soft rustle of curtains shifting caught his attention. Across the street, Mrs. Lockwood's silhouette was barely visible through her window, watching, lingering as if waiting for some reaction. He turned away from the sight. He didn't care about whispers or speculation. He had bigger things to worry about. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. 911, what's your emergency? His voice came out eerily calm. I'd like to report a robbery. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about theft. It was war. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights washing the house in streaks of red and blue. Ethan stood on the porch, arms crossed, as the officers moved inside, scanning the mess left behind. Their voices were low, methodical, asking routine questions he barely registered. He answered mechanically. Yes, his wife had disappeared. Yes, she had taken everything. No, there was no forced entry. No, he hadn't noticed any suspicious behavior. At least, nothing concrete enough to report. Detective Sarah Langley, a woman with sharp eyes and a skeptical frown, flipped through her notepad. Mr. Caldwell, given the note your wife left, this appears to be a domestic matter, not a crime. Marital assets are tricky. Ethan clenched his jaw. Not a crime. She had drained their savings, stolen heirlooms, and disappeared with another man. How was that not theft? Langley sighed, sensing his frustration. I understand this is difficult, but without evidence of coercion or fraud, there's not much we can do. The words felt like a slap. He had called for justice, but instead, he was being dismissed like some bitter husband left behind. As the officers wrapped up their useless report, Ethan tuned them out, his mind already working through his next move. The system wouldn't help him, so he'd handle it himself. The next morning, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the empty coffee cup in front of him. Sleep had been impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, images flashed behind his eyelids. Claire's note, the empty safe, the red shoe abandoned at the door, the sound of her laughter from months ago, now tainted, twisted. He exhaled sharply and pulled out his laptop. If the police weren't going to take this seriously, he would. Claire hadn't just left him. She had executed a plan, and every plan had a pattern. He started with the bank records, combing through their financial history. Withdrawals had started appearing weeks ago, subtle at first. Small amounts, just enough to avoid suspicion. Then, in the last 48 hours, everything had been drained in 3 large transactions. She was covering her tracks. A second account caught his attention, one he didn't recognize. Opened months ago in a different city. His stomach clenched. She had been planning this long before she left. He moved on to her phone records. Claire had always been careful, never leaving messages or texts that would raise alarms. But there was a number that appeared too frequently, at odd hours across multiple months. He had found him. The name came up in public records. Daniel Reese, a personal trainer at the high-end gym Claire had joined 6 months ago. A man in his early 30s, all perfect teeth and easy charm. Ethan stared at his smug face in a photo taken at some charity event, fists clenching. So this was him. It wasn't just an affair. This was something bigger. Reese had a history, different states, different names, a pattern of wealthy women falling for his act, then disappearing with him, leaving behind ruined husbands and empty accounts. Claire hadn't left Ethan. She had been taken. Or maybe she had been in on it all along. A cold realization settled over him. This wasn't just about heartbreak or betrayal. This was about deception on a level he hadn't even considered. And if Reese was as smart as Ethan suspected, they were already on the move. He grabbed his phone, fingers shaking only slightly as he searched for a number. A name he had only heard in passing but had never imagined needing. Jonathan Graves. Private investigator. former military, specialized in cases where the system failed. Ethan hit dial. The gruff voice answered almost immediately.
Graves.
I need help, Ethan said, his voice steady. I think my wife just pulled off a con with a professional scam artist, and I need to find them before they disappear for good. A pause. Then, a low chuckle. Sounds messy. I like messy. Ethan closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He had no idea where this path would lead. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them get away with it. The office smelled like old coffee and cigarettes, the air thick with the kind of tension that came with handling cases no one else wanted to touch. Ethan Caldwell sat in the worn-out leather chair across from Jonathan Graves, who leaned back against his desk, studying him with narrowed eyes. Graves didn't need to say anything. He had seen cases like this before. A man betrayed, left with nothing, desperate for answers. But there was something different about Ethan. He wasn't just grieving. He wasn't here for closure. He wanted something else. You really want to go down this road? Graves finally asked, lighting a cigarette. Because once you start, there's no turning back. Ethan's jaw tightened. I need to find them. The investigator exhaled a slow stream of smoke, watching him. Not just find them. You want to make them pay. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't have to.
Graves es Mirked.
All right, let's see what we're dealing with. Over the next hour, Ethan laid out everything he had found. Claire's financial records, the hidden transactions, the phone calls, and most importantly, Daniel Reese's history. Graves flipped through the papers, nodding occasionally. He's good, he muttered. Real good. The man had been playing the same game for years, moving from city to city, always targeting wealthy women with access to money. He never stayed in one place too long, never left a paper trail, and always disappeared before anyone could catch him. But this time they had a lead. Claire and Reese had withdrawn large sums of money just before they vanished. But there was one last transaction, a payment to a luxury beachfront rental in Miami.
Graves grinned.
Looks like they're taking a little vacation. Ethan's grip on the chair tightened. That was his money, his life savings. Graves leaned forward, his expression darkening. Now here's the thing. You could go to Miami, knock on their door, scream in their faces. But that won't get you your money back. That won't teach them anything. Ethan clenched his jaw. Then what do you suggest? The investigator flicked his cigarette into an ashtray. We set a trap. By the time Ethan left Graves' office, the plan was already in motion. It wouldn't be enough to find them. If he wanted justice, he had to outplay them. Reese thrived on greed. He was always looking for the next big score, the next easy payout. And Ethan was about to give him something irresistible. That night, Ethan sat in his apartment, staring at an email draft on his laptop. A message carefully crafted, written under a fake name using a burner account. The email detailed an exclusive investment opportunity, a private art collective in Miami, offering returns so high they couldn't be ignored. It was bait designed for someone like Reese. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he hit send. If Reese and Claire took the bait, they wouldn't even see what was coming. They thought they had played him. Now it was his turn. The sun beat down on the crowded streets of Miami, a city that pulsed with energy, wealth, and excess. Ethan Caldwell stood at the edge of it all, watching as tourists strolled past luxury boutiques, sipping overpriced cocktails and carrying designer shopping bags. Somewhere in this glittering chaos, Claire and Reese were living off his stolen money, believing they had escaped without consequences. They were wrong. From a rented apartment overlooking the bay, Ethan and Jonathan Graves monitored every move their targets made. The investigators' contacts had worked fast, surveillance photos, financial transactions, even security footage of Claire and Reese checking into a luxury high-rise. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, and soon they'd take the bait. 2 days earlier, Ethan's fake investment proposal had reached Reese's inbox, a fabricated opportunity, expertly designed to lure in a man who thrived on deception. The message painted a picture of a private art collective, an exclusive, invite-only club catering to ultra-wealthy collectors looking to invest in high-value, discreet acquisitions. The kind of deal too perfect for someone like Reese to resist. Less than 12 hours later, he had responded. He was interested. The conman thought he was about to pull off another scam, siphoning funds from a fake investment and disappearing before anyone knew what hit them. He had no idea that, this time, he was the mark. Ethan sat in the dimly lit apartment, staring at the laptop screen. The fake website Graves hacker had set up looked flawless. Exclusive branding, fabricated testimonials, transaction histories that appeared real. Everything was designed to pull Reese deeper. "We'll make him feel like he's in control," Graves muttered, leaning back in his chair. "The more confident he gets, the more reckless he'll become." Ethan nodded. He wasn't just watching this unfold, he was orchestrating it. The plan was simple. Reese would buy into the investment, believing he was scamming a bunch of rich collectors. He would start moving money around just enough to test the waters. But in reality, those transactions would lead straight to accounts Ethan controlled. And once Reese was locked in, they would take everything. Ethan clenched his fists, the weight of what he was doing settling over him. He had spent his life following rules, trusting people, playing fair. That man was gone. Revenge was a lesson that needed to be learned the hard way. The next evening, Reese and Claire arrived at the Art Collective for an exclusive event, a private showcase in a sleek, upscale gallery. Everything about the setting was designed to reinforce the illusion. The people, the wine, the whispered conversations about discreet transactions. Reese walked in with that same arrogant confidence Ethan had seen in his photos. Dressed in a crisp suit, he moved through the room like he belonged there. Claire followed, her arm draped around him, laughing at something he whispered in her ear. Ethan watched from a distance, his pulse steady. She looked different. Darker hair, a new wardrobe, expensive jewelry that hadn't belonged to her a month ago. She looked like she had erased the life they had built. And that was fine, because by the time the night was over, Ethan would erase hers. Graves' voice crackled in his earpiece. "They're hooked. He's about to make his first transfer." Ethan didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled. Everything was going exactly as planned. The sound of clinking glasses and hushed conversations filled the luxury gallery, where Reese and Claire moved through the crowd with the ease of people who believed they belonged. Reese's hand rested lazily on Claire's waist, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced calculation of a predator searching for the next easy kill. But what he didn't realize was that, this time, he was the prey. Ethan stood at a distance, watching his carefully laid plan unfold. Every detail of the night had been constructed to pull Reese in deeper. The lavish setting, the whispered deals, the promise of exclusivity. The man thrived on greed, on believing he was always the smartest person in the room. Tonight, that arrogance would cost him everything. Reese's interest had been piqued early in the evening when one of Graves' contacts, posing as a high-profile investor, subtly dropped hints about a hidden market. One where the ultra-wealthy could double their money overnight through discreet, unregulated deals. The kind of deal a man like Reese couldn't resist. The conman took the bait easily, playing along with the conversation, testing the waters before making his move. He was in his element, throwing out lies so smoothly that they almost sounded like the truth. But Ethan had studied him well. Every glance, every smirk, every shift in posture. It was all predictable. An hour into the event, Reese made his decision. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he initiated a transfer, a test investment into what he believed was an elite underground fund. The numbers flickered on Ethan's screen as he monitored from his laptop. The amount started small, then grew. 100,000, 200,000. By the time Reese finished, nearly everything he and Claire had stolen was now sitting in accounts controlled by Ethan and Graves. Reese leaned back, smug, thinking he had just pulled off another effortless con. But as soon as he hit the confirmation button, everything around him changed. The room, once filled with quiet sophistication, shifted in atmosphere. The front doors of the gallery swung open, and a dozen men in dark suits moved in, their presence subtle yet unmistakably authoritative. Among them were undercover law enforcement, members of the criminal underworld Reese had crossed, and people Ethan didn't even need to name. For the first time that night, Reese's confidence faltered. He straightened slightly, his hand instinctively reaching for Claire's wrist, his body tensing as his carefully crafted world began to crack. A voice broke through the noise. "It's been a pleasure, Mr. Reese." The investor he had been speaking to smirked, giving him a slow, mocking clap on the shoulder. Reese's mouth opened slightly, his mind racing to piece together what was happening. He turned sharply, scanning the room for an exit. That's when his eyes locked onto Ethan's. The recognition hit instantly. Claire gasped quietly beside him, a look of shock flashing across her face. "Ethan?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Ethan didn't react. This wasn't about her anymore. It never really had been. Reese lunged, trying to push past the men blocking his way, but the moment he moved, two of them grabbed his arms, locking him in place. The confidence drained from his face, replaced with something else. Fear. Ethan stepped forward, closing the space between them. Reese struggled against the grip holding him, but it was useless. "You set me up," he spat, his voice tinged with disbelief. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You did that yourself." Claire took a step back, her gaze darting between Ethan and Reese, as if only now realizing the extent of what had happened. She had thought they were in control, thought they had won, but the truth had finally caught up with her. As Reese fought against his captors, his usual charm and manipulation failing him for the first time, Ethan felt no satisfaction.
No anger. No hatred.
Just a quiet understanding that this was how it had to end. He turned away before the final pieces fell into place. He didn't need to see what happened next. Whether Reese ended up in prison or worse at the hands of the criminals he had scammed wasn't his concern anymore. His fight was over. By the time Reese and Claire were led out of the gallery, Ethan had already walked away. 2 weeks later, Ethan stood in front of his classroom, chalk in hand, explaining the delicate balance of chemical reactions. His students scribbled notes, asking questions, completely unaware that not long ago, their teacher had orchestrated the downfall of the people who had betrayed him. But that life was behind him now. As he erased the board, his reflection flickered in the glass, and for a moment, he barely recognized the man looking back. Stronger, sharper, a man who had lost everything and rebuilt himself from the ground up. This was his second chance. And this time, he wouldn't let anyone take it from him.